Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who think the perfect housewarming gift is a bucket of raw meat. Right now, we are reading every short story in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird Anthology, including this one, Leonora Carrington's White Rabbits. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in the kind of metaphors that she's using, the kind of images that she's juxtaposing together in really interesting ways on the page.
I'm Bob. I'm so interested in Leonora Carrington. I've never been that into surrealism. I've gone to see Dolly's stuff, and it's like, you get kind of tired of it, seeing it so much. But then I saw her stuff, and I think it's absolutely incredible. So Leonora Carrington wrote the story White Rabbits. I think she didn't write a lot. She was a big painter. Like, she painted a lot, and she's extremely famous. I think it took a while for people to really recognize how much of a genius she was. Her painting is awesome. If you've ever been interested in surrealism, I think hers is the best. Like, better than Ernst, better than Dolly. It's really cool.
I was totally unfamiliar with her painting work. I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of a simpleton when it comes to the art world, but I looked up her stuff and I was really struck. The first thing that came up for me was this one called Self-Portrait Inn of the Dawn Horse. And so it's a self-portrait, but it's her in like horse riding pants, and she's sitting in like a childhood room. You know, there's like a rocking horse behind her. And then there's just this like pregnant hyena at her feet, like it's just such a like disturbing and interesting image. But the more I looked, the more I realized that animals are everywhere in everything she does. Like there are animal figures in almost all the paintings I saw. And I looked up some of her stories, and, she has this one called The Debutante, which is about a girl befriending a hyena at a zoo, teaching it to speak, persuading it to take her place at a ball. And so the hyena goes to this dance wearing the skin of the girl's maid, who it killed and ate as part of its like evening meal. There's all of this animalistic symbolism and imagery running through her stuff. And I read an article in the New Yorker called How Leonora Carrington Feminized Surrealism. And it has this anecdote in it about her talking about how she was born. So, there's several stories about how you could be born. A man loves a woman, and there's the birds and the bees. A stork came flying through the window. No, for her, what she says is, one melancholy day, her mother, bloated by chocolate truffles, oyster puree, and cold pheasant, feeling fat and listless and undesirable, had lain on top of a machine. The machine was a marvelous contraption designed to extract hundreds of gallons of semen from animals, pigs, cockerels, stallions, urchins, bats, ducks, and, one can imagine, bring its user to the most spectacular orgasm, turning her whole sad, sick being inside out and upside down. And from this communion of human, animal, and machine, Leonora was conceived.
Oh my God. She's a genius. Sheer genius. What was it? I misspoke earlier. What's the name of her novel? You sent it to me earlier because she also wrote a novel.
So she has a few books. The Hearing Trumpet is a big one. And then she also wrote a memoir of being in an insane asylum called Down Below that I would love to read.
In The Guardian, they wrote her one of the obituaries, and she got married to Max Ernst, or at least they ran off together, and they got married shortly after when she was 20 and he was 46. And it just begins... It's a great start to an obituary. It says, soon after her coming out ball at the Ritz Hotel in London, Leonora Carrington, age 20, went to see her father with some shocking news. She had fallen in love with the 46-year-old married surrealist painter Max Ernst. She intended to move in with him. And then it says, her horrified father said two things to her: an injunction never again to darken his door, and a prediction that she would die penniless in a garret, as artists, in his opinion, inevitably did. So she moved with Max Ernst, but then he gets thrown in jail because of political unrest, and he's determined a political enemy, and her husband is just gone. Her whole life is just stripped away. She has a breakdown. They throw her in the asylum, and then just terrible things happen to her, and she was stuck there for years. So I think that would be an interesting memoir to read. It's got to be very harrowing. She I watched this interview with her. This was so interesting. If anyone wants to see it, it's by the Tate. So if you look up Tate Museum, Leonora Carrington, Britain's lost surrealist. Her like long lost cousin finds out they're related, goes and tracks her down to Mexico City, and at this point she's 93 or 94, and her cousin is trying to figure out where her inspiration comes from or where her art comes from. And Leonora Carrington has such an intense theory about this. She asks her, okay, well, was there anyone else in the family who did painting? She says, no. What about your nanny? I know you had an Irish nanny who told you lots of shorts. And she just goes, stop. She says, because she's like, where does it come from? She says, stop. It's not hereditary. You're trying to intellectualize something desperately, and you're wasting your time. She's 93 at this point. That's not a way of understanding. To make it a mini logic, and you can't buy that road, you can't find anything. So she says, okay, by your own feelings, if you see a painting that you like, the canvas is an empty space. And then the cousin says, well, what if I went and brought you a painting? Could you tell me what inspired you? What were you thinking at the time? She says, no. It's a visual world. You want to turn things into an intellectual game. It's not. It's a visual world. It's totally different. So she has this idea of inspiration, where it comes from for a visual artist. It comes to you, and it only comes to you, and you can't learn it. You don't get it from someone else. She just knew at 20 that she had to be an artist, and that's why she's attracted to Ernst. She saw her first surrealist painting, and she said, I'm an artist. And she immediately had this whole visual field open up to her that she then had to portray on blank canvases.
You know, in a way, it feels tangential, but I wonder if it might actually be central. I discovered that she made her own tarot deck. You know, she painted her own collection of the major arcana. And I wonder if that kind of creativity is being channeled from a similar place. And she might say, you're trying to intellectualize it, but I mean, think about it. Like the surrealist, like the move is always to juxtapose wild things that don't belong together. But once they are together, you have to make sense of them, or you have to sit with the ambiguity of how they don't necessarily make sense. And I think that her interest in tarot reveals something, because I think that, you know, there's a similar move being made, not just with her tarot cards, but with any tarot card. You know, it's a randomized slot machine of images that don't necessarily belong together. And yet you look at them and you have to intuit, meaning you have to intuit how they belong together in the story and the placement and things like that. So, you know, like I said, I'm sure she would be like, you're trying to intellectualize something that can't, but I'm just noticing things. That's all I'm going to say. I'm just noticing things.
Sure, Zach. trying to make this mini logic happen. I think that's very interesting. Now, if someone knows a lot more about tarot than we do, if you could correct us, or I have an idea that might be about this. I wonder if some people, when they do tarot, it's not just a slot machine of all of these images that I can then put together and make my own interpretation, but I wonder if sometimes it's a synchronicity. So whatever is happening inside you is now happening inside the universe in this card. So that card is not just something for you to figure out or puzzle out or logic out, but it's something there. And now there's this relationship between two spaces. You know, this meaning, or at least this information, represented in space before you in a card, and now whatever is in space inside of you, these two things have this synchronistic connection, whatever the adjective of that would be. But this idea of a visual world, I think, is very interesting. She goes on to describe it more, and she says that she gives an example. She says, okay, just stop talking about any idea. She says, a visual world has to do with what we see in space, which changes all the time. How do I know to walk into this room and around the bed without running into it? She doesn't exactly explain that, but I think that idea is so interesting, of a visual space always changing, and then you have to represent it in one painting, in one instance. And I think that is very weird. It's good that you bring up tarot and this idea of a connection to you and something else. And I think through the weird, we've seen many stories where space is getting messed around with a lot. You know, when we read Jean Ray, he has this story of two spaces eclipsing each other. And it feels like space and time eclipse each other. And then when they meet, something comes out and affects everything. We also, when we were reading, just recently, Zach, when we were reading one of the three Polish Poes, and he had the really great dream story. Let's see. Here it is. This author was so interesting. Bruno Schultz. He was so interesting because it seemed like the way he was writing was not just stream of consciousness where things are going on in your head while things are going on around you. It was more like as things go on in his head, it actually changes the architecture of the story. It changes the plot, it changes the characters and their relationships to each other, and actually changes the space. So for him, when he's writing, it feels like you in your head, your fantasies create space. And I feel like Leonora Carrington, in trying to capture space or experience space and represent it, is doing something very similar.
Maybe this is a good time to talk about what actually happens in this story, because I think we're ripe at this point for a few examples, of which there are many, 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 many in this story. It's just a nonstop parade of imagery and symbols and unconscious becoming life and, references to antiquity. But let's get talking to White Rabbits. So we open with a character who has moved into a place called Pest Street. And there's a house across the way, but she never sees anyone in there. But then one day she's watching a raven swoop down, and then seemingly simultaneously, a woman comes out of the house with dark hair. Very Raven-esque. We'll say the Raven-esque woman appears with the raven. We could talk about that more later. But she gets invited over, but the person says, "Hey, can you bring over some rotting meat?" Which I think by any and all regards is a strange and yet titillating request. I, for one, was intrigued. So she comes over after letting meat sit out and rot, and there's flies everywhere for a few days. She comes over, and the house is filled with rabbits, and the people inside the house have twilight skin. It sparkles in the light. And then the neighbor also has a husband there. But the point with these rabbits is the rotting meat is for the rabbits to eat. And then, things get weird from there. But I think that's generally enough for us to really start talking about this story.
These white rabbits, they got to be what VanderMeer was thinking about. When he's talking about white rabbits with the cameras on, all these white rabbits coming in and out of Area X, this other dimension. These white rabbits are so interesting. Why on earth are you feeding rabbits meat? Why?
Why are you feeding the rabbits meat? And then why are you killing and eating the rabbits afterwards? I totally agree with you that I think VanderMeer had these white rabbits in mind when he's writing Absolution, because, the whole weird move in that story was that all of these rabbits show up. Readers of the series will know where the rabbits come from, but the rabbits show up, and then the rabbits start eating the crabs. And then, at some point, we hear in the series, we hear where the people are eating the rabbits. And it's like there's something unholy about eating a strange or a weird being. You know what I mean? And the weirdness of those rabbits is expressed through the fact that rabbits are vegetarian and these are eating crabs and just kind of mechanically chewing through them and crunching them. I think the line of influence is pretty clear here. But this idea that the rabbits are eating not just meat, but rotting meat. Like there's really only a few things that eat rotting meat. Like vultures, for example, eat rotting meat. And like the thing about birds or other creatures that eat decomposing flesh is like every religious tradition in the world, like every social moray tells you that you don't eat those birds. Like in Leviticus, for example, like you don't eat the carrion birds. You don't eat the vultures and the scavengers of things that are rotting. Like that is, and I think that, I won't say that every culture in the world, but I would say that's a generally commonly agreed upon thing that you don't eat those ones. So for them to turn around and then eat those rabbits, which are already weird, is like a double, whoa, what's going on here?
Whoa. I think this is full of double whoas. You said earlier they have twilight skin. They have that sexy Cullen glittering skin. However, their house seems to be rotten. When this new neighbor comes in, she's invited by the woman going, "Toodaloo, "Oh, come here, bring your rotten meat, please." And when she goes, the door itself, like the handle falls off, and she says, "It looks like no one had entered or exited this place in like decades." It's this gross nest kind of thing that she goes into. She ends up in the house. Now, the house has beautiful Baroque furniture, or very imposing kind of antique furniture, but then it's littered with skulls and animal bones. Rabbits, as you said, are these cute little cuddly creatures, but they're gnawing on flesh. There is so many weird opposites in this. The people, we find out as they're shining like these beautiful stars, and they get closer and closer. They're about to share food. The woman's like, "Come here, we're going to be best friends." The husband says, "Why did you bring someone here? We don't bring guests." She says, "Oh, I haven't had a friend in 20 years. And then she says, "Wouldn't you like to stay at least for dinner?" And the new neighbor is getting really nervous at this point, obviously, because there's a house full of rabbits staring at you from the corners, and the ground is littered with skulls. You should run. But she wants to feel polite. Yeah. So the woman then says, "Stay with us, and in 7 years, you'll have the same condition that we have, starry skin, aka leprosy." And then she just runs away. But there is a tension of opposites throughout this story, where we have the grotesque and we have the extremely beautiful. We have the Cullens, and then we find out, oh wait, no, it's actually a deadly disease. We have these cute little cuddly rabbits. Oh wait, no, they're gnawing on maybe human, or at least flesh, rotten flesh. It feels very alchemical.
That's really interesting. Tell me more about the alchemy stuff, because it's not on the surface.
Oh, this will be our new project, Zach, alchemy. So a lot of the surrealists were interested in Freud. I think Freud made a big impact on the surrealists. But I think often it would be, okay, I'm going to show you shame. I'm going to show you repression, and so a lot of the surrealism is a little bit darker, a little bit violent, or just kind of in the background, darker, violent. But her stuff looks almost medieval. It looks very influenced by Bosch. And I know that she was not reading Freud. She was actually reading directly like alchemical texts. So she was studying alchemy and I think working this out. And I think when you see a lot of that, what's that called? Transmogrificate? Well, people turning into animals, animals turning into people.
Transmigration of the soul.
Oh, transmigration of the soul. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
so she was looking. She was looking at this. So she's interested in these ancient sciences, not just in the flash interest suddenly in Freud, but she's interested in these really old medieval texts.
Carl Jung was also super, super, super into alchemy and made a whole lot of hay about a kind of like psychological transformation that people who, actively plumb their unconscious, they undergo. And he kind of refers to that as a kind of like alchemy of the mind, alchemy of the spirit. Now, it's really interesting how the previous author we read, Fritz Lieber, also was super into reading Carl Jung. So I guess what my point is here is, even if she's not reading Jung, just this idea, I think, like in this chronological slice of time, people are simultaneously turning back to medieval texts, turning back to pre-modern texts, pre-Enlightenment texts, and using it to enrich the weirdness of their stories. It's almost as if like what the move is, I think, going in, and we could track this as we go, but I think the move going forward might be reaching back in the past and pulling out interesting things and putting them in a more modern perspective, and trying to use these old frameworks, which aren't really used anymore, to try to add some mystery and ambiguity and weirdness to stories that are set in modern life.
Which is, so yeah, we just read Fritz Leiber, and it's modernity coming back, or it's industrialization. It feels like it's coming back, but of course it's a new thing. I think this is an interesting thing going on in weird fiction. Again, the VanderMeers, quoting Lovecraft, are saying, okay, what we're trying to do is not just ghouls, not just chains, not just ghosts. It's no longer gothic fiction. There's something special. And I think you're right. Not just looking back at the past, but seeing how the past can influence the future, or it can even overtake the future in certain ways. There's something about the displacement of time and the moving around of time, or the intersection of epochs, these different epochs kind of eclipsing each other, or at least infecting each other. And I think that is what she's doing in the writing and in paintings. You have dreams entering into this space, interacting with each other. And some of these dreams, some of these images could be ancient, some of them could be from yesterday, some of them could be from the future, and they're all inhabiting that same space.
And this one really does have the character of a dream, doesn't it? Like, I mean, the way that there seems to be all of these kind of like floating signifiers that don't really cohere together. The rabbits, I mean, obvious symbols of fertility, but also an object, a tool of the magician. Their skin, which is like skin but not like skin. The husband's name is Lazarus, the man biblically that Jesus brought back from the dead, and yet he's not back from the dead. He has leprosy. So there's all of this like weird mishmash of reference and things that feels very dreamlike. It feels like it's something that doesn't quite make sense. And then the way it ends with this shocking image of her fingers falling off like shooting stars. And then that's like the end of the text. It feels like we wake up there. It's just, I don't know. It's an aesthetic. We'll call it that. It's an aesthetic.
It's a vibe, as the kids are saying these days. I think when you said it feels like it doesn't make sense, that's really interesting, because it feels like it does. Like, it feels like it totally makes sense, but it doesn't look like it does. It's like her paintings. You look at it like, why is he dressed like a fish? Why is there this person that's kind of a mountain made of snow? It doesn't look, if you try to, again, intellectualize it, as she said, if you think about it too much, it doesn't make sense. But if you look at it, something feels very right about it. Same with this story. It doesn't make, why on earth would they have rabbits? But it feels, all of these rabbits, the timidity, these rabbits being in the shadows, suddenly lunging out, taking meat, going back into the shadows, and these people that are so inviting, shining like stars, falling apart like shooting stars, and inviting you over when they have leprosy. It feels like a dream situation where you can't say no. You're there, and you're trapped, and you don't really know how to get away. You're just there with the rabbits. Zach, one more thing. I don't know if this is going to necessarily be a feature of weird fiction, but we found in the beginning there seems to be this obsession or following different obsessions to your demise. And in this, there's the promise of, in 7 years, if you stay with us, your skin will be like stars. I wonder, in Liber, we thought, okay, if you worship this machine god, your life will be smooth because you're now part of the machine. Subtly mentioned in that story. I wonder if there's a promise of something in weird fiction of, if you follow this, you might get something you want, but it's also going to mean your death or your demise, or something terrible will happen to you. You'll both get what you want and you don't want at the same time, and the desire is so tempting you can't say no.
It's really like the return of the deal with the devil, the Faustian bargain. And it's a very old trope. And I think that you might be onto something. I think that's something that we need to be looking out for in the future as we read through this anthology. All right. I'll talk to you later, Bob.